Okay, let's try this one more time. I think Facebook is messing with me because I keep getting cut off. This is insane. I just want to do the whole thing from start to finish. I'm going to try one more time. Hello, I'm Rocco Million with Real Progressives, trying one more time to get through this presentation, get through this live stream here. I'm going to be going over Dr. Fadhel Kaboub's excellent presentation that he gave the Democratic Socialists of America last Saturday in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Kaboub is with the Bazinger Institute for Economic Justice. I'm going to highlight some of the best points that he made, and just to pique people's attention so that they will try to drive traffic to Dr. Fadhel's original presentation, which I'll put in the comments afterwards, so that people watch this presentation in its entirety, because it is chock full of vital information. All right. And the title of his presentation is called Paying for Economic Justice. A Better World is Possible. And he starts outlining what a progressive policy agenda looks like: living wage jobs, universal health care, parental leave, child allowance, free education, social and economic justice, clean air, water and energy, sustainable green energy, public transportation, better infrastructure, safety standards, okay? And then he starts to talk about all the defeatists and nihilists that come out of the woodwork when we start talking about solutions, to tell us, it's not possible. And they always want to know, well, how are you going to pay for all that stuff? Our government's broke. We can't afford it. The rich will never allow higher taxes, so we can't afford it. Or they'll talk about the national debt being a burden on future generations. We can't take out a credit card in the name of our children from the Bank of China. So that's immoral. It leaves a future burden on our children. And, and so all of this stuff is nonsense. It's not based in reality. And they'll start talking about hyperinflation, places like Zimbabwe. They'll say America's going to be like Greece if we do this. It's all nonsense. And Dr. Kaboub annihilates these silly, nonsensical ideas, these scare tactics and neoliberal narratives that were designed to keep us divided. Dr. Kaboub annihilates this with simple logic and common sense. So he first starts talking about policy solutions at the federal level. A federally guaranteed living wage job program for everyone who wants one. Federally funded, locally administered. I call this the revolutionary progressive keystone program, from which all other programs will flow, because it's a democratic means of production from which we can increase the supply of just about any real resource that we need for the general welfare of society. So we can increase everybody's standard of living. We can meet everybody's base needs without raising taxes or making cuts, and it'll be non-inflationary. All right. And then he starts talking about postal bankings for the people that are left behind, that have no bank account. He talks about a new Reconstruction Finance Corp to finance the Green New Deal. These are things that we had in the past. In the New Deal, we had this big institution that would finance huge public works programs. So we can do that again. We did it before. We put a man on the moon. We could do it again. We went from a Great Depression to being a #1 world power in the world by deficit spending, by investing on society, in our society. He talks about stronger financial regulations, a much stronger consumer protection board, single-payer health care. He talks about canceling student loan debt. And this is where he plugs the Levy Institute and the wonderful work Dr. Stephanie Kelton and Scott Fulweiler are doing. They were commissioned to do a study examining the macro effects on our economy of canceling student loan debt. And what they found is no surprise. When you cancel student loan debt for the bottom, people can spend more money. They have more disposable income to spend into the economy. So when you give demand at the bottom, the top get to produce more supply to meet that demand. Everybody's happy. It's a win-win. A rising tide lifts all ships. That's what we're talking about here. Then he starts talking about local level solutions. This is stuff we could do at the local level if the federal government won't do what we want. They don't want to budge. We can take a lot of action at the local levels and even at the state level and even municipal level. Things that we can do to help. We can have pilot programs at the local level. So he starts off by talking about a forward-looking spending approach. This is focusing on root problems and root solutions. We have a school-to-prison pipeline, okay? And that's very expensive, and it has tremendous hidden cost. It drags all of our standard of living down. Instead, we can invest in early childhood development, invest in education, after-school programs, summer camps. It's much cheaper to do that instead of waiting till kids become criminals and then dealing with it. And there's a huge human cost to that as well. So, he talks about public banking at the state level or even at the local level, because they're local governments and state governments, they get all these tax revenues coming in. And so this is a way to cut out the middleman. Instead of having Wall Street finance, community projects, you can have, a state bank or a local bank finance it, and that cuts out the middleman, which lowers costs drastically. And because it's owned by the citizens, any profits can be invested back into the community or they can be given out as a dividend. So, there's all kinds of different solutions. The sky is the limit. All right. The most intriguing thing he talked about at the local level is a complementary community currency. Okay, this is something that a city can pay their municipal workers 95% in dollars, and then 5% in local tax credits. Which can then be used to pay their municipal taxes or their utility bills, or can be used at local participating businesses. And those businesses will accept them because then they can use them to pay off their taxes. They can use them to pay off their utility bills. And if you think about a situation, a local community using its publicly owned bank to, maybe fund a wind farm or a solar farm where they're, making energy from thin air, then, they can really issue these tax credits to be for people to pay off their whole utility bill. This increases the community's spending power, increases people's spending power. It will jumpstart local economies. Picture a situation where, a local government can, go and hire homeless people to do odds and ends around the community, cut grass, clean the streets, do all kinds of different things. And then they can take these local tax credits and buy food at local businesses. All right. So this is something local communities can do regardless of the federal government. All right. They don't have to go begging for money from the government. They don't have to raise taxes either. So this is a really great idea. We'll talk more about that stuff later. And then he jumps right into MMT. He starts to explain MMT. And he wants to make an important distinction between a currency issuer, which is the monetarily sovereign, like our federal government, that makes dollars from thin air. They're mandated by the Constitution to mint and tax to provide for the general welfare of society. So a monetarily sovereign government, the currency issuer, is never revenue constrained. They never need profit. They make dollars from thin air by congressional decree, all right, at will. And, currency users like us, households, states, and local governments, we can't do that. We really are revenue constrained. We really are income dependent upon our incomes. If we spend more than our income, that is real debt for us. We can't make dollars like the government can. So government debt is very different from personal debt, okay, or anything like that, because we can't make dollars. And so this is why MMT is counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive only at first, though, because how we think of our own household budget has nothing to do with the federal government's budget. They make dollars at will by decree. We can't do that. So, debt for a government is pretty much just an accounting identity. All right, a government can never go broke. It can always pay all debts denominated in its own unit of account. And then he starts to talk about, sectoral balances. Well, now first he wanted to make sure people understood government must first spend dollars into the economy, then dollars circulate in the economy. Only then can governments then tax dollars back out or sell bonds, because bonds are bought with dollars. Taxes are paid with dollars. So spending is always first. All right, it's just basic logic. You can't tax what it doesn't exist. You can't sell bonds if dollars don't exist. It would be like trying to start a game of Monopoly by collecting rents. It's impossible. Money always needs issued first. So the reality is, the fact is, federal spending funds taxpayers who then pay tax or buy bonds. It can never be vice versa at the federal level. And so spending always precedes taxes and bond sales. So now we can see clearly that taxes don't fund federal spending. Bond sales do not fund federal spending. It's a big lie we've all been brainwashed with. And it keeps us paralyzed, unable to, it makes the government unable to do what it needs to do. And it makes us accept it. So it makes us accept pointless austerity, because we think the government needs to, tax the rich or cut defense before it could spend on society and satisfy its mandate to the general welfare. But government never needs revenue. It never needs profit. It makes dollars from thin air. And then he starts to, focus on our sectoral balances. All right. And when we're talking about sectoral balances, we break it down. The government sector is on one side of the balance sheet, and the non-government sector is on the other side of the balance sheet. All right. In the non-government, there's two sectors: the foreign sector, which is the rest of the world, and then there's the domestic private sector, us. We're both non-government, and then the government's on the other side. So the debt, when government deficits, it's spending more dollars into the economy, into the non-government sector, than it takes back out. That's called a deficit. And that money goes somewhere. It goes into the non-government sector. So a deficit is net dollars in the non-government. The government's deficit is our surplus in the non-government sector. All right. Its sectoral balances don't lie, and they always net to zero. Okay, so if government is minus 10, if they deficit 10, then that means the non-government is plus 10. And if you add them together, negative 10 and plus 10 together, it nets to zero. Sectoral balances don't lie. They always net to zero. This is a simple double entry of bookkeeping. And it's fact. It's scientific fact. This is not opinion. So, that's why government, so that's why, government is never revenue constrained. It never needs profit. All right. Article 1, Section 8 mandates that Congress mint and tax to provide for the general welfare. All right. So federal spending funds taxpayers who then pay tax or buy bonds, never vice versa at the federal level. All right. And when government spends dollars into existence, it is our asset in the non-government sector. Okay. The deficit of the government is the surplus of the non-government. So we also offset deficits, government deficits, with government bonds. Okay, that's our national debt. So in reality, our national debt is just a record of all net dollars in the economy. If our national debt was zero, we would have $0 in existence. That's what that means. So Next, he talks about monetary sovereignty and the 4 conditions it takes to be monetarily sovereign. All right. First, a government must issue its own currency and then tax only in that same currency. And then the debt that it sells must only be denominated in that same currency. And it must have a floating exchange rate, meaning the government doesn't exchange anything for its currency. It only promises to accept that currency back to extinguish tax credits. To extinguish tax obligations. So that's the deal. If you have those 4 conditions, you're monetarily sovereign. You can never run out of dollars. You're not revenue constrained. You don't need revenue or profit. He starts to show a sectoral balance graph that is excellent. His PowerPoint presentation was excellent. I wish I had the technical capacity to show it. But again, check out the actual presentation and you can see that. I suggest you watch it in its entirety. It shows what we just went over. The government's deficit is the non-government surplus. If you fold the graph on its 0 axis, you see it's a mirror image, the government deficit and the non-government surplus. The balance sheet of the government and the balance sheet of the non-government is a mirror image of each other. They match up to the penny every time. So that's the deal with that. Now, so again, the red ink of the government is the black ink of the non-government. It's real simple. When the government spends dollars into the non-government, when the dollars leave the government's coffers and they got to go into the non-government's coffers. It's real simple, double entry bookkeeping. Okay. Now he starts to talk about, how you'll see people that are running for office and they might have been successful in a business or they know how to balance their personal budget, their household budget. And so they say, look, I know how to turn a business. I ran surpluses. I've turned a profit in my business. Send me to Washington and I'll do the same. I'll balance the budget. Or worse, though, I'll run a surplus. I'll run a federal surplus. And people will cheer and they'll think that's a good thing. That's horrible, though, because, again, it might be good to balance our personal budget, but for a government to balance its budget or run a surplus, that means it's starving the economy of federal spending. It's starving the non-government of federal spending. And then we have to fill the gap with private credit. So then we're vulnerable to predatory lending, things like that. It's very bad news. So, again, now if you want to, because we run a trade deficit right now, we've been running trade deficits from the 70s pretty consistently. That means that the foreign sector and the non-government is always in surplus automatically. Okay, so if we would run a federal balanced budget at this point, then by accounting identity, our domestic private sector must be in deficit. So that means we have to go and fill the gap with private credit. That's bad. Private credit always dries up, which leads to booms, busts, and bailouts that only help the rich. And government got to move into a big deficit position anyway to bail out the rich. So instead of running a balanced budget, we need to have government deficit spend enough up front, target true full employment with a federally guaranteed living wage job for every person who wants one. And you spend at the bottom. That's how you balance the economy. And then, private credit is irrelevant. People aren't vulnerable to private credit to begin with. People aren't, vulnerable to predatory lending to begin with. So this is very important to understand. He starts talking about root problems, the root problem, structural inequality, and what he's talking about is intentional unemployment. All right, from the 70s, both parties have been targeting unemployment. They killed the full employment policies of the New Deal, ushered in the neoliberal era, all right, where we now target unemployment. That's intentional systemic poverty. That's artificial scarcity. It's pointless austerity that kills more than drugs and guns combined, and we accept it. And we think, it's okay. We accept intentional unemployment. That's intentional poverty. And then that, all the bad stuff that comes from that, the socioeconomic exclusion, mental health problems, suicide problems, opiate addiction problems, violence problems, all these costs that come with keeping this unemployment, this buffer stock of unemployed that the capitalist class then use to wage war on labor with. Okay, because if now, your boss don't have to give you a raise. They can simply say, look, we got millions of people unemployed outside, and they'll do your job cheaper than you. So that puts downward pressure on all labor wages and working conditions. This is the primary reason our wages have been stagnant since the 70s. While corporate profits, productivity, and cost of living are at record highs. So that's a big problem. That diminishes our purchasing power. That diminishes the 99%'s purchasing power. And then we have to fill that gap with private credit. That's bad. We're vulnerable to predatory lending again. All right. We're transferring a bigger share of GDP to the top 1%. And they show another excellent graph from Pavlina Chernova at this point. And it really illustrates this point that back during the New Deal and before, when we had a recession, the recovery would go primarily to the bottom 90%. And that it was like that for the longest time. Then in the 70s with the neoliberal era, that started to change. And it started to flip. And to the point now where after the global financial crisis in 2008, all of the gains went to the very top 1%. The bottom lost, okay? We lost market share. We gave a bigger part of the GDP to the 1%. We're in private debt to our eyeballs. So this is not how you get a balanced economy. It causes all kinds of problems. So that's called the wage gap. And it's the easiest way to see our nation's fascism. Because again, we target unemployment. We're keeping a buffer stock for the capitalist class to wage war on labor with. They use that buffer stock of unemployment to drive all labor wages down, all working conditions down. It's class warfare. It's wage suppression. It's fascism. And both parties have done it since the 70s. Okay? They're both right-wing neoliberal parties that put profit over people and society. Understand that because it's very important. There is no recovery for the 99% now. All the gains go to the top. We are in a permanent recession. The 99% is in a permanent recession. And then really the bottom income distribution, people like blacks, minorities, they are in a permanent depression. All right. It's very easy to understand. Trickle down doesn't work. Just look. The bottom income distribution is the first to be fired in an economic downturn. And they're the last to be hired in an economic uptick. So they're basically always in depression, the bottom income distribution. That's why, trickle down theory is it's been debunked multiple times. And even the Democratic version of trickle down is still trickle down. It's still voodoo economics. If you target the middle income distribution, it's still trickled down. We need to target the bottom income distribution because demand naturally travels up. It's just simple logic. You spend at the bottom and people have immediate needs. They need the jobs of the skilled and educated above them. So demand naturally travels up. When we guarantee the jobs of the bottom income distribution, because they make up the largest segment of society, the more dollars they have, the more they're able to demand and guarantee the jobs of the skilled and educated above them. It's how you balance the economy. The only way to balance a consumer-driven capitalist economy is by spending at the bottom to maximize the velocity of money. It's a simple logic, guys. So we need a structural fix for this because this is structural inequality. All right. We need a systemic something to fix these systemic abuses that cause so much problems. And that's what the federal job guarantee does. It empowers labor against the predatory nature of capitalism. It gives the average person their leverage back. Right? It restores democracy. It stops gerrymandering. It stops racial discrimination, police terror, all these different things. And it does it all with extreme mobility. It's revolutionary. Okay, if your city, we'll use Flint for an example, if it allows its police to terrorize the people, they allow their infrastructure to be neglected to the point where people are getting poisoned, people can simply get up and leave, knowing that they have a living wage job waiting for them wherever they go. And what that does to the substandard city, they lose their tax base and with it their ability to operate. Because again, local and state governments are revenue constrained, unlike the federal government. So this is a way to make local and state governments work to keep their people happy, or else they lose their tax base and their ability to operate. This is a revolutionary program. The federal job guarantee also makes the minimum wage the federal living wage without a mandate to the private sector. All right, either the private sector beats the federal living wage, or they can't attract a labor workforce away from the federal job guarantee program. So, it revolutionized the private sector. They would have to redo their business model to value labor, or else they can't attract a labor workforce away from the job guarantee program. But, right now, though, we're not doing that. We allow all the gains to go to the top, and now we have this, what Dr. Kaboub referred to as the Uberization of the economy. I shared a link in the event from earlier today about the gig economy. And, it's about Americans celebrating the fact that we work ourselves to death. This is sick. This is neoliberalism. We privatize the public space and deregulate everything. We starve the economy of public spending and force everybody into copious amounts of private debt. All right, this is horrible. It's insidious. It's economic terrorism. And what they're talking about with this Uberization of the economy or gig economy, they're talking about the precarious class. That's what we are now in the neoliberal era. We're called the precarious. We have a precarious existence. We're one mistake away from being destitute. People are stuck in part-time starvation wage jobs. They can't make ends meet on minimum wage. They got to go, either work a couple jobs just to make ends meet, and then they're not there to raise their family. It breaks up the family unit and leaves their kids vulnerable to gangs and addiction and everything else. Or the parents themselves have to make ends meet on the black market. They got to get involved in crime. And this drags everybody's standard of living down, because you get a dog-eat-dog society. People are trying to survive. They're starving. So everybody's at each other's necks. We get a dysfunctional, violent society. And that's for everybody. Nobody can walk down the street without, fear. That's the problem with this. That's what they're talking about with the Uberization of the economy. We have millions of people that are unemployed, millions more that are underemployed. All right. And we want to say right now we're at full employment. I mean, this is sickening. All right. If we had the federal job guarantee in place right now, they estimate about 23 million people would take a living wage job right now. So I don't care what the official numbers are. If you ask me, 23 million people are unemployed or they're underemployed, which is just as bad. All right. That's the real unemployment number. So the federal job guarantee stops all of that. All right. Again, if we can either have a buffer stock of unemployment that the government keeps for the capitalist class to wage war on labor with, and that's why our wages have been stagnant since the 70s, while productivity and corporate profits and cost of living are at record highs. Or we can have our government keep a buffer stock of full employment. Okay, so this would empower labor against the predatory nature of capitalism. It would be a much better economic stabilizer than the Band-Aid fixes we use right now. Things like food stamps, where we will subsidize corporate workforces that pay starvation wages, and under the guise of humanitarian aid. But it's bullshit. It's corporate welfare. There's nothing civil about allowing people to pay starvation wages. The food stamps are very inadequate anyway. And a lot of times at places like Walmart, the employees use them food stamps to buy food at Walmart. So Walmart they're just raking it in. They're double dipping, and they have no incentive to raise prices because they know government will step in and fill the void. That's not how we do it. We can do a much better job with we could do a much better job with full employment. Now, again, that makes the minimum wage the federal living wage without a mandate to the private sector. All right, we're not telling them what to do. If they want a labor workforce, they're going to have to beat the federal living wage and working conditions, or else they're going to have to vacate the economy, and then somebody else will take their market share. So that's how that works. And so that, then he wants to, Dr. Fadhel goes back into talking about national debt, inflation, and hyperinflation. Again, the national debt is our savings account in the non-government, right? Because when the government deficit spends, that's our surplus in the non-government. If the government is minus 10, then the non-government is plus 10. All right, so the national debt is just a record because it's just a record of all dollars in existence because we offset deficits, government deficits, with bonds. So that's government debt. So our national debt is just a record of all dollars in existence. If our national debt was zero, we would have $0 in existence. That would be the real burden. Okay? So right now we have about $20 trillion in existence. All right, that's our national savings account. It's not a burden in any way. So, and then they talk about inflation, which is, when demand outstrips supply. Okay, that's too many dollars chase too few goods. If you don't have enough bread to go around, there's going to demand, and everybody needs bread. So demand is going to be outstripping the supply of bread. So people are going to start bidding the price up of the existing real resources. That's how you get inflation. So to deal with that, all you do is you increase the production of your supply of real resources. And you can do that if we have unemployment, we have untapped productive capacity to increase our supply of just about any real resource with a federally guaranteed living wage job program. Also, our trade deficit. We're net importers, so we're able to increase our supply of real resources with our infinite dollars. Okay? This is why even after trillions of dollars in corporate bailouts and endless wars and corporate welfare, we still can't hit our inflation target rate. We haven't had no problems with inflation. Our problem, again, is with deflation. Our wages have been stagnant since the 70s, while corporate profits and cost of living and productivity are at record highs. That's with diminishing labor's purchasing power and forcing us into private debt to fill the gap. That's the big problem. Okay, so the federal job guarantee is a structural way to address it all, and that's why we say it's such a revolutionary program. I call it the revolutionary progressive keystone program, from which all other programs will flow. From true full employment, we have labor for single payer, we have labor for green sustainable energy infrastructure, we have labor for nationalized health care, we have labor for child care, we have labor for elderly care, you name it. This is all stuff that raises our standard of living, everybody's. We can meet everybody's base needs, all right, without raising taxes, without making cuts, without it being inflationary. Because we have so much idle capacity, idle productive capacity. So until we are at full employment, maximum productive capacity, we have room, fiscal space to spend without fear of inflation. Now, and then once you're at your productive capacity, you're at max productive capacity, you simply tax extra demand from the economy, or you sell bonds to extract extra demand from the economy and control inflation. So now we see the real purpose of taxes and bond sales. It's not to fund federal spending. That's impossible. It's to extract extra demand to control inflation, because, again, inflation happens when demand outstrips supply. So you either increase supply or you tax extra demand, or you sell bonds to extract extra demand. All right. Now, hyperinflation is an extreme case where a nation has its productive capacity severely hampered, or even taken away completely. You look at Zimbabwe, freedom fighters took over. They had a coup, and they distributed the farmlands to the freedom fighters who were generations removed from working the land. So, Zimbabwe went from being one of the top agriculture producing nations in the world to being one of the least, worst. So, long story short, they lost their productive capacity. They didn't have enough real resources for all their people. They tried to spend more dollars into the economy, but at that point, it don't matter. If you don't have enough, bread to go around, more dollars will just bid up the prices of the existing real resource. Get it? So Dr. Fadhel, he also used a analogy of for inflation, talking about dentists, and if we wanted to provide everybody with dental care tomorrow, all right, but we only have 500,000 dentists. Okay, so tomorrow 300 million people are going to want dental checkups. They're going to want their teeth fixed, and we're not going to have the real resources to meet that demand. So we have to focus our spending on our productive capacity. We have to be increasing our productive capacity with our spending. That's the main thing. So one way you could do that is through education. We could be training new dentists. We can be building new dental offices, investing in R&D for new dental techniques, whatever. You know what I mean? That's how you deal with that. It's about directing our spending to increase our productive capacity. The money part of the equation doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is we have the real resources available for people to buy with that money. So if we have the real resources to meet the demand of any program, we can always afford that program without raising taxes, without making cuts, and it won't be inflationary. All right? Back to hyperinflation, though. We look at post-World War I Germany, the same thing. They had their infrastructure bombed out in the First World War. That greatly hampered their productive capability. All right, then they owed reparations to the rest of Europe, places like France. So they had to export most of their real resources to pay their reparations. That left not enough real resources for their own people. They try to spend more into the economy as a last-ditch effort, but it doesn't help. It just bids up the prices of the existing real resources. So, that's hyperinflation. But America has no problem like that. Again, we have a huge capacity to produce. All right, we only use about 73% of our industrial capacity. We target 5% unemployment. All right, so we have untapped productive capacity. We are way under capacity. That's artificial scarcity. That's austerity that kills just like bullets. And we accept that stuff. That's why this stuff is so important. We have tons of fiscal space to spend without even thinking about inflation. America is resource rich too, And then, like I said, the other part of it is, our trade deficit. We're able to buy the real resources of the whole world for our infinite dollars. So that's another big reason why we're able to control inflation so well. We can't even hit our inflation target rate. So, the federal, and then he starts talking about the federal job guarantee being a two-tier system. We need the big jobs programs, the big infrastructure programs at the federal level, federal work programs dealing with infrastructure, with healthcare, education, and then also at the local level, using the existing infrastructure of local nonprofits, because these are the people that already know the insides and out of their communities. They know exactly what their communities need. If the federal government was to supply a grant to any of these nonprofits, they would immediately know how to utilize that money to get, to help their community. So we could use the existing infrastructure of these nonprofits, to match the needs of each community with the skills of the unemployed. And if, they run short on, say they need construction workers, we could train more. Okay. We can do all this kind of stuff. We put a man on the moon. Again, we went from a Great Depression to being the #1 world superpower by deficit spending, by investing in our society. We can do all that again. We just got to demand it. We got to collectively unite in solidarity and demand it. And we can force our socially owned government to do anything. This is how you bring back democracy. This is how you make everybody participate in a democracy. Again, people have a federal job guarantee. It helps, camaraderie. It helps people have a sense of purpose, and they're participating in their community, and they're participating in society. And this would drop crime drastically. People have hope again, so it'll help with addiction problems drastically. It stops gerrymandering. It makes cities and local governments work for their people. That's the deal. We can do all this stuff. And then, he talks about this buffer stock mechanism, and he says it in a way that it was unique to me. I never heard it put in this way, but it makes so much sense. And for this example, we're going to stick with maybe corn. Okay. Government will keep a buffer stock for certain commodities that it deems most important, one of which is corn. So in years of surplus, the government becomes the buyer of last resort. It'll buy up that surplus corn and keep it in a silo so that the price of corn don't fall to zero because there's so much supply and not enough demand. So farmers won't lose their livings. And then in years of deficit, when farmers can't produce enough to, deal with the inflationary pressures, government releases some of its buffer stock back into the marketplace. This is how they stabilize prices and control inflation. All right. They do this for the most important commodities, but in reality, our very most important commodity is labor. But yet we let the cost of labor fall to zero. Okay, because the effective wage is zero. If you're not working, you're getting zero. So labor falls to zero, but we won't let corn fall to zero. You see, something's wrong with that picture, right? So we need government to be the employer of last resort. Say in an economic recession, okay? Firms and businesses and factories, they start laying off people. Okay, so if people start losing their income, they stop spending then. And it makes a downward spiral. Less spending means less production is getting consumed. So then the businesses start to downsize even more, and it's a downward cycle. So government has to intervene to stop that. We do that. We have all types of economic stabilizers right now, like food stamps, welfare, unemployment. All right, but these are Band-Aid solutions. Okay, we can have a federally guaranteed living wage job. The private sector starts laying off people. They don't want these people. The government buys up that unemployed labor. Okay, and instead of keeping it in a silo, we utilize it, rebuilding our crumbling communities across America. Our communities are starved of human resources, starved of infrastructure. So we can use that labor to rebuild our communities right now. So it's a great economic stabilizer because it keeps people it keeps their income coming in, keeps the level of income coming in so they can keep up their level of consumption, spending dollars into the economy, and that shortens the duration of a recession and it shortens the severity. Okay, it's a superior economic stabilizer to anything we have, and it's an inflation anchor. Again, because we can increase just about any real resource we need for the general welfare of society. The problem is deflation, Nathan. Absolutely. I already said it a couple of times. Our wages have been stagnant since the 70s, while productivity and corporate profits and cost of living are at record highs. And that's because our government targets unemployment, keeps that buffer stock of unemployed. So, that puts downward pressure on all labor wages and working conditions. So, and we can have a buffer stock of unemployment, or we can have a buffer stock of full employment. All right. The buffer stock of full employment is much better. All right. Remember now, our government's job is the public purpose. Alice Winningham says it great. A socially owned government should always work for the public purpose and then let the individual make what they can from that. It should never work for the private purpose of the individual and force society to make do with the scraps. It's a big part of fascism, suppressing labor and empowering capitalists and corporatists. So that's government's job is not to make profit for the 1%. Government's job is the general welfare of society. And if you got millions of people unemployed and underemployed, that's not consistent with the general welfare. That's not how you get civil society. So it's fascism. So, we can either keep a buffer stock of unemployment or we can have government keep a buffer stock of full employment. There's no middle ground there. Either you support our government keeping a buffer stock of unemployment so that the capitalist class has a weapon to wage war on labor with, or you support our government keeping a buffer stock of full employment so we can empower labor against the predatory nature of capitalism. And again, we have tons of idle productive capacity. We only use about 73% of our industrial capacity, and we target 5% unemployment. So we have a lot of room to spend without even thinking about inflation. Again, right now, they estimate about 23 million people would take one of these living wage jobs if they were offered. So to me, that's the real unemployment rate, 23 million people. That's nowhere close to full employment, all right? That's craziness. But really, the whole program, 23 million people, and they do the estimates very conservative. They estimate high on the wages and low on the cost, the offsetting costs, just to be, conservative. And it still only comes out to about $600 billion a year, or about 4% of GDP. Okay, that's nothing, especially when you consider, after the 2008 recovery cost, we spent trillions and we got no recovery. There is no recovery for the bottom 99%. We got nothing for our money. It did very little to help the problem. The bottom never recovered. So, again, this is very conservative. The benefits of the federal job guarantee will most likely be much, much higher. Okay, you got to consider, again, the opioid epidemic. Dr. Fadhel talked about a study that they're doing. They estimate $1 trillion a year. Okay, you think about the police state apparatus, all the prisons, all these different things. Think about the suicides and mental health. All right, you think of how much it'll cut down on unemployment and food stamps and welfare. This will save us so much money, and it costs us so much more money to keep unemployment. It makes no sense. We can instead keep a buffer stock of full employment and raise everybody's standard of living. Remember, public debt for society and a higher standard of living is the entire point of government and dollars to begin with. Article 1, Section 8 mandates Congress mint and tax for the general welfare of society, not for the private purpose of capital at society's expense. That's fascism. So next he starts talking about the local solutions, primarily forward-looking spending, These are things that we could do at the local level if the federal government refuses, okay? It's always better to do these programs at the federal level, of course, but, until that happens, we can have local pilot programs, to show the rest of the country that this stuff is possible and it's feasible. Instead of an education to prison pipeline, states and local governments can invest in education, early childhood intervention, stuff like that, the arts, things like this. It's always cheaper to spend up front on a kid instead of waiting till they become a criminal and dealing with it that way. Plus, even from a non-economic point of view, from the human point of view, it's just better for society all around. And that's common sense. So, and then they talk about this idea of state and local banks. This would cut the middleman of Wall Street right out of the equation, and it'll stop that leakage of local dollars from leaving the local economy going into the Wall Street economy. All right, it would cut costs big time. You can have states or local governments, finance their own community projects, and because they're owned by the citizens, any profit can be reinvested into the community, or they could do a dividend or something every year. There's all kinds of different things they could do. Picture a state bank investing in its own wind farm or solar farm. They're making energy from thin air. And then we could talk about, Dr. Kaboub's, idea about local currencies, local tax credits. These local governments can issue their own tax credit to municipal workers, for instance. 95% dollars, 5% local tax credit. These people can use these tax credits to pay off their municipal taxes, pay off their utilities. They can use them at local participating businesses. Those businesses will accept them because they can then pay off their municipal taxes. They can pay their utilities with it. And again, especially if if the local government has their own power plants, but even if not, because utilities can use these tax credits to pay their municipal taxes. That's how it works. So this is stuff that the local government can do without begging for dollars from the government, the federal government, without raising taxes, without making cuts. Picture a government taking a bunch of homeless people and giving them jobs, doing odds and ends around the community, cleaning, doing maintenance on the yards, doing all kinds of stuff, and then paying them, pretty much exclusively in tax credits, which they could use at local businesses, buying food, buying all this kind of stuff. This is a way to jumpstart a local economy. It's a way to expand communities' purchasing power and expand the citizens' purchasing power without raising taxes, without making cuts. This is a very, very good idea. They originally wanted to do this for Greece. They give Greece a way to reclaim its sovereignty. I think they used it in Italy as well, because these two countries gave away their monetary sovereignty to the European Union. So, this is a way for them to reclaim some of that. It's a very, very good idea. Next, he's talking, he wants to make sure, we got to stop saying there's no solutions, because clearly we have tons of solutions. The ruling class loves pessimists. They love these nihilists. They depend on them. These are their puppets. They love when these people come and try to shit on good ideas without offering logical rebuttals or logical alternatives. That's how they stop progress. So quit saying there's no solution. And we also need to move beyond the taxing the rich to spend argument. Government never needs to tax the rich. And when we think we have to tax the rich before government can spend and satisfy its constitutional mandate to the general welfare, then we accept pointless austerity that kills just like bullets until government gets more revenue. It's insanity. Government never needs revenue. It makes dollars by will, by congressional decree, using the power granted by the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. So, government don't need to cut defense. It doesn't need to tax the rich so that it can spend on society. That's the whole point. Government uses taxation to drive real resources to the public sector. It needs those real resources like infrastructure, like labor for the military, sanitation systems, legal systems. It needs all this stuff to satisfy its constitutional mandate to the general welfare of society. So it uses taxation to create unemployment so that it can provision society with real resources using paid employment. That's it. It's a social construct, a means of production. All right. Dollars are just a law to satisfy tax. We can't run out of laws, so we can't run out of dollars. It's real resources that constrain us. All right. So the money part of the equation doesn't matter. That's always infinite for a sovereign, a monetarily sovereign. All right. The only thing that matters is we have the real resources available to buy with that money. So again, we need huge, bold actions to deal with these structural problems of unemployment, intentional poverty, because the current policy is just too weak and ineffective. The bottom 99% are in a permanent depression, or we're in a permanent recession. The minority community, the bottom income distribution, is in a permanent depression. All right. The bottom income distribution is the last to be hired in an economic uptick, and they're the first to be fired in an economic downturn. And this is a clear example of why trickle-down economics doesn't work. It's voodoo economics. Even when the Democrats like to target the middle income distribution, that's still trickled down. We need to represent the bottom income distribution first and foremost. Because when we guarantee the bottom income distribution, the jobs at the bottom income distribution, since they make up the largest segment of society, the more dollars they have, the more they can demand and guarantee the jobs of the skilled and educated above them. Demand naturally travels up. And that's how it works. You give people at the bottom money, you give demand at the bottom, then they're going to need the services of the skilled and educated above them. It's just it's simple logic. And if the federal government doesn't do it, we need to start working on local solutions, pilot programs. There's lots of things we can do at the local level, all right? But the main thing is economic justice via a federal job guarantee is not only possible, it's desirable in every way. And it's affordable. It's much more affordable than what we're paying right now to keep people unemployed and destitute. All right, we keep people unemployed and poor, try to keep prices down. That's a horrible, horrible thing to do. It's inhumane and it's unnecessary. A job guarantee program is an inflation anchor. It's a much more effective means to keep prices down. Because again, you can increase just about any real resource you need for the general welfare of society, if need be. Push comes to shove. So the first question that he got after this awesome presentation was about inflation. How ain't there going to be a hyperinflation or an inflation, if we have a federal job guarantee, because Walmart, will have to beat the federal living wage. So won't they just pass that cost on to the consumer? And the answer to that, Dr. Fadhel gives a good answer, but I have my own answer. The answer to that is if Walmart doesn't want to beat the living wage, first of all, they have to vacate the economy, and then someone like Target will just absorb their market share. And the same thing, if Walmart tries to jack their prices up unfairly, then the other stores in existence will be able to mop up. They'll be able to make more sales and they'll take over Walmart's market share. Okay, but if all else fails, government could step in. All right, we already have regulations keeping, the prices of corn and commodities in the financial market, stable. We can do the same for anything, for labor. We could do the same. And so, the fact is, when you add demand at the bottom, it's a win-win, because then the top get to produce more supply to meet that demand. So, business would like this too. Plus, they get a pool of good workers when they need it. The buffer stock of full employment will get bigger in a recession when jobs start to, downsize. And then when the economy picks back up, the buffer stock will naturally shrink because people will go back to work in the private sector. Everybody's happy. This is how, recessions get shorter and they are less significant. And then the bottom income distribution is not in a permanent depression. So it's awesome. And then he says that the great saying that I never heard, but it makes so much sense. When workers spend what they get, and capitalists get what they spend. It's just simple logic. You know what I mean? So everybody would be happy. His next question was, well, we know the ruling class may, the businesses may do better, but it's not all about profits. They want power and control. So how will we overcome that? And the first thing I say is, first of all, capital flight doesn't hurt a monetarily sovereign government. If they don't want to meet our demands, they have no control over government. If we unite in solidarity, we can force our socially owned government to satisfy its constitutional mandate. All right. Walmart has no control over that. And if they don't like it, they can leave. All right. Then we can, other stores can take that market share, or if need be, government has plenty of labor to take over the means of production itself. And then the means of production would be a democratic means of production, instead of a for-profit means of production owned by the 1%. So it would be much better for society anyway. Um, and the other thing to remember is, again, when we the people have all the power here, when labor unites in solidarity, we can't lose. We can force our socially owned government to do anything, really. All right, that's the whole point. If the majority of people don't work, there is no society. And this is how every working class gain has been got from the beginning of time. The ruling class never just give us justice. Do you think Nixon wanted to give us the EPA? No. People power did that. They stopped the Vietnam War. Back during the Great Depression, labor united and they occupied the factories. They didn't let anybody work. FDR told his ruling class buddies, look, either you give up a little bit of wealth and power now or you give it all up tomorrow in the revolution that's sure to follow. The ruling class had to give us the full employment policies of the New Deal. Okay, we are guaranteed government for, of, and by the people. That's democratically, socially owned government for the general welfare. That's socialism. We're guaranteed it in the Constitution before socialism was even a word. But if we accept our socially owned government working for the private purpose of capital at society's expense, they're going to give us fascism every time. All right, so it's up to us to unite and collectively demand it. And, MMT is the revolutionary vehicle because it unites all sides. It describes our economy in a nonpartisan, non-ideological way with scientific fact from the macro level. Okay, this is MMT unites Republicans and Marxists and Greens and anarchists and Democrats. I mean, it's insane. That's right there. That's remarkable. That's why it's the revolutionary vehicle. That's why I call MMT kryptonite for neoliberalism. And the federal job guarantee will condition the public to trust in government again. The government can create useful jobs directly. So once this program is in place, people are going to be very protective of it. It's going to be like Social Security, people are going to be very protective of it. And also, if there ever is problems in the private sector with production, then the public would feel much more comfortable, seizing it with a democratically owned means of production. Okay, because they know government can make efficient, effective jobs that benefit everybody and raise everybody's standard of living. So this is a great thing. And we never need to tax to spend. We have to understand that. Government never needs revenue. So we need to separate taxing and spending. Okay, because we have to save lives today. We have to spend at the bottom and save lives. We don't want to add in an extra fight of taxes. All right, if you look, corporate bailouts got bipartisan support. All right, corporate welfare, endless wars get bipartisan support because they're not attached to taxes. All right, even hurricane relief got bipartisan support because it wasn't attached to taxes. In fact, we lowered taxes. So the empirical evidence for everything I said is all around us. All right. The next last question was, what about the robots? The robots are going to take over. And Dr. Fadhel had the perfect answer when he said, hey, the robots take over. That's a great thing. Let them do all the precarious work, all the dangerous work. Let them do all that private sector dangerous stuff. You know what I mean? And then the job guarantee will absorb that displaced labor and then refocus that labor, the jobs on society, raising everybody's standard of living, meeting everybody's base needs in a green, sustainable way. So, and he also talked about the Industrial Revolution, because these arguments about robots taking over have been around for hundreds of years, over 100 years. And, back in the day, it once took 99% of the population to produce all of our agricultural needs. Okay? Mechanization came and took over, and people were scared, but it was a great thing. Now we only use about 1% of the population for our agricultural needs. And now all them jobs are able to focus on things that raise everybody's standard of living. They're able to focus more on the arts. They're able to focus more on society. People don't have to work out in the field all day. It raises our standard of living. It's a good thing. It's all about how our government responds to crisis. We don't have to let anything hurt us. The government is in control. Government is the supreme authority per the Constitution. Remember, government's job is not making profits for the 1%. So who cares if they like this or not? They have no say-so. All right, our socially owned government is supposed to work for the public purpose. Remember. And if we unite in solidarity, labor could stay home from work for one day and watch America grind to a halt. Go back to work the very next day. But, demonstrating our ability to organize and shut shit down. Then we can leverage that capability to get our demands met. Very low risk, high reward. Pretty much anybody can take a day off of work. We can't afford not to do this stuff. People are having to survive on the black market right now. People are having to work themselves to death right now. All right? Standing up and it may put a bullseye on our back, but, sitting down puts the bullseye on our children's back, in the future. Doing nothing, accepting the status quo, kicks the can down the road, and it condemns our future generations. All right, we have to spend on our productive capacity. Government's whole job is to spend on society, maintaining the general welfare of society. That means we got to invest in education because we need smart kids to produce the real resources that we're going to need in the future. We have to invest in healthcare because we need, healthy kids to produce the real resources we're going to need in the future. We have to invest in green, sustainable energy so we're not depleting our natural resources, so we're not poisoning ourselves. These are all common sense things that people don't think about. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you go and you look up Dr. Kaboub's presentation that he gave. I'm going to put it in the comment section right now. Sit down with a cup of coffee and just absorb the information. I had to watch it. I watched it 4 times now. It was 2 hours long. I watched it, a couple days in a row. So it's very good stuff. And it's the most important information that we need to learn right now as a collective. So thank you guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad I finally got this whole thing done. All right, take it easy. Remember, look up Dr. Stephanie Kelton, look up Dr. Fadhel Kaboub, look up Dr. Bill Mitchell, Dr. Joe Firestone, Dr. Stephen Hell, look up Ellis Winningham, Warren Mosler, Pavlina Chernova, Mike Norman. Follow Real Progressives on all the platforms. Follow Deficit Owls, the Modern Money Network, the Levy Institute, the Bazinga Institute. These are all people speaking the truth, So thanks a lot, guys. Take it easy.